Okay. So thanks very much. On behalf of the Columbus Karma Take Some Choling, I'd like to welcome all of you to a book club. And this evening, we're going to continue our discussion of the Khenpo Tsultrim Jamso commentary on the 37 actions or the 37 practices of a Bodhisattva. The class tonight will start with practice number 6 and move forward in the text. I will be doing screen sharing in a few minutes with the ebook. So if you don't have your book with you, we'll still be able to follow along in the text. I'm going to start with a short prayer, and you can join in your heart and in your mind, thinking that you dedicate this session of our training in love book club to the benefit of sentient beings. I'll recite a short prayer in Tibetan and then a short prayer in English. O sanje chudan so chi chanam la janchu badu dani chapsu chi daji jinso ji pe sonam ji drola penshir sanje drupa sho. Semchen tamche dewa tang dewe gyutan tempar gyuchi tunga tang dunya gyutan drawa juji. Dunya mepe tewa tampa tam hendrawar juji nerin chandan yitan drawe tamyen chen pola nepa juruchi. O palen sawelam harim poche tagi chiwar pede de shula kadrin chempukane che sunte kusun tuking odrup saldu sun. In the Buddha, his teaching, and the order most excellent, I take refuge until enlightenment is reached. By the merit of generosity and other good deeds, may I attain Buddhahood for the sake of all sentient beings. May all beings be happy and have the causes of happiness. May they be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May they have that great happiness, which is freedom from suffering. May they dwell in great equanimity, free from attachment and aversion to those near and far. Okay, thanks very much. So the topic of this 5-week discussion is training in love. The reason that it was given this title is because if we look at the problem of humanity, the problem of humanity is that we all want happiness, and I think that's the sort of the conundrum of humanity. We all want happiness, but because of our habitual tendencies and our selfishness and so on, we tend to make mistakes in getting that happiness, and we try to do all kinds of things that are based on selfishness, and all of the schemes that we make up based on selfish motivation and clinging and fixation that we have, all of these schemes that we make up trying to get happiness for ourselves tend to only bring more suffering and difficulty to our lives. And it really is, it's kind of, I think of it as sort of being like a tragedy, you know, they talk about Greek tragedy and Shakespearean tragedy, where tragic figures, they want what's best, but because they are not fully formed as individuals, they make mistake after mistake after mistake and bring misfortune on themselves. And I think that this is the difficulty of being a human being, because it's very hard for us to know what is right and what is wrong. In other words, what is worthwhile and what needs to be abandoned. And so this is why when the Buddha attained his enlightenment, when the Buddha attained his spiritual attainment of perfection, when the Buddha attained his Buddhahood or awakening, he made it his mission in life to explain how it was that he came about his enlightenment, how his enlightenment happened, what he did in order to attain this freedom, and created a path that other people could follow, and so that other people could experience the same freedom that he experienced. And that's why he taught the four truths known by the noble, that suffering is part of life, that suffering has a cause, and that that cause is clinging and fixation. That's because suffering has a cause, it has a solution, and that is letting go. And the fourth noble truth is that there is a path that leads to the relinquishment of suffering and the liberation from suffering. And so then the Buddha taught the Eightfold Noble Path, which is summarized in the four statements: do no harm whatsoever, practice virtue as much as possible, and tame your mind. This is the teaching of the Buddha. And so these three things, doing no harm, practicing virtue, and taming the mind, are how we gain liberation in our life. And the dividing line between benefit and harm is selfishness. When we practice self-fixation, we suffer. When we practice giving and selflessness, we experience happiness. And so these simple truths taught by the Buddha help to guide us in our life. In the later teachings of the Buddha spoke about the supremacy of the practice of love and compassion. He said that even though we are up against a very difficult enemy, so to speak, which is our own grasping habits and our own grasping and selfish fixations, he said, even though we're up against a very strong enemy, he said there is a way to disarm this enemy, and that is love. By practicing love and rehearsing love for ourselves, rehearsing love for others, and trying to expand our love to fit all beings, by attempting to expand our world of love, that we can then gradually relinquish fixation on self and gradually increase the causes of happiness in our life. And so training in love, my friends in 12 step say, they call it this, they say, fake it till you make it. So we rehearse the practice of love and compassion through a practice that's called exchanging oneself for others. Exchanging oneself for others was taught by the Buddha, but then systematized by Shantideva, the great Indian Buddhist saint in the 8th century. And in the 8th century, Shantideva wrote about exchanging oneself for others in his masterwork, The Way of the Bodhisattva. And he spoke about the teachings of bodhicitta. If you remember from previous classes, bodhi means awakening, and the citta means mind. Let's see if I can make, there we go. And so the mind that wants to awaken from the sleep of ignorance. And so bodhicitta consists of two practices: relative bodhicitta and ultimate bodhicitta. Relative bodhicitta is training in exchanging oneself for others, practicing love and compassion. And ultimate bodhicitta is an understanding of the nature of mind and all reality. And so there are two types of meditation taught in bodhicitta: the relative bodhicitta meditation on love and compassion, which we know in Tibetan Buddhism by the title Tonglen. Tong means to send, and Len means to take. And by practicing Tonglen, we visualize love and compassion, and train by visualizing that on our out breath, we send goodness to all sentient beings. And on the in breath, we remove their suffering. And this technique was taught by the great masters and is practiced by us today. I was speaking with someone the other day who is returning to Buddhism after a period of time away from study and practice. And they said that one of the books that they chose to read was a book written by a Zen practitioner on Tonglen. And that kind of touched me a bit, because the Tibetan tradition is one of the few traditions in the world of Buddhism to maintain the practice of Tonglen. And so it didn't really exist in the same form of sending and receiving meditation that that we have in the Tibetan tradition. So it was really interesting to see what a Zen master would say about this practice. And so I'm super happy that people are studying it and practicing it and expanding the use of this. I've even seen books on Tonglen written by Theravadan masters. So I think that the practice of Tonglen, it definitely has a lot of benefit, not just for us in our practice, but all people. Right now, I'm trying to think of ways to teach Tonglen in a secular way. So that's something that I'm going to be working on in the upcoming months. And I'm really interested to see if it's even possible to teach Tonglen from a secular point of view that doesn't bring up Buddhist ideology or Buddhist teaching. So it's going to be a bit of a challenge, but I'm looking forward to it. So Tonglen, the practice of sending and receiving, how it works is that by sitting in meditation, we imagine that on our out breath, we send out goodness to all sentient beings. And on the in breath, we think we remove their suffering. And if you remember from Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche's teaching on Tonglen, his teaching is that when you breathe out the goodness to others, you think that it's like sunlight spilling over a valley at dawn. It's just the sun suddenly pervades everywhere. The sunlight pervades everywhere. And that it touches all sentient beings, brings happiness to them, and relieves them from their suffering. And that on the in-breath, we imagine that we remove all of their suffering and we see them being relieved from their suffering. And Rinpoche says that when the suffering touches us, it meets our bodhisattva motivation, our pure bodhisattva motivation, and it dissolves, all the suffering dissolves into nothing and disappears. And then with the next out breath, we send goodness, remove suffering, it meets our bodhisattva motivation, dissolves into nothing and disappears. And in this way, we gradually accustom ourselves to wanting happiness for others and wanting freedom from suffering for others. Because the Buddhist definition of love is the wish for others to be happy. And the Buddhist definition of compassion is the wish for others to be free of suffering. And what's interesting about this, we wish for them to have happiness and its causes. The cause of happiness in the teachings of the Buddha is selfless action. And the cause of suffering is a selfish action. So, so when we are praying the prayer of the four immeasurables, when we're praying that prayer, we're wishing for sentient beings to have both happiness and its causes, which is positive action. And we're wishing for them to be free from suffering and its causes, negative action. So that's a little bit about the basics of the course that we're taking. And the particular aspect that we're working on now is something called the practice of a bodhisattva, the 37 practices of a bodhisattva, which were written between the 13th and the 14th century, around the 14th century, by the Tibetan saint Rongyal Togme. One of the things that people asked at the very first part of our course, they wanted to know how to enter the path of the bodhisattva. And there are a couple of ways to enter the path of the bodhisattva. One of them is by formally taking the bodhisattva vow, which is a vow of training. You vow to train as the Buddhas of the past have trained in the 6 perfect virtues of generosity, ethics, patience, diligence, meditation, and wisdom. So you make the promise that you will practice and train as the bodhisattvas of the past have trained. And then also you will then when you take the bodhisattva vow, you make this aspiration to benefit beings in these ways, and then The other way to enter the path of the Bodhisattva is by making the aspiration that one will attain Buddhahood for the benefit of others. This is called generating aspiration bodhicitta. And so this is a little bit about how we start. And then we also have to know how to train in the Bodhisattva path. And that's where books like the one we're studying, the 37 Practices of a Bodhisattva, that's where it comes in. It's going to teach us the how. Another thing that people asked in the early parts of our class was to teach us how to let go. And the Practices of a Bodhisattva, the book, The Practices of a Bodhisattva, are going to teach us how to let go. And so this is what we've been learning up to now. So I'm going to pause for a second while I'm getting the screen sharing going for our book. And then I wanted to see if anybody has any questions in chat. I see from last time, Amy, you had a question, and I apologize for not remembering what it was. Can you unmute and ask your question?
I wrote it down there. Last week you spoke about that we shouldn't practice Dharma to remove obstacles. And I was kind of struck by that, thinking of the Tashi prayer or Guru Rinpoche, or some even more. And so, of course, we want, all sentient beings to be free of suffering, but we also don't want that for ourselves. And so how does am I not understanding it correctly, or can you clarify?
Oh, sure. I'm happy to clarify, because if I did say that the purpose of Dharma is not to remove obstacles, I did misspeak. So I'm really glad you brought this to my attention, because if we think about what prevents us from experiencing our Buddha nature, because the Buddha gave this teaching that we all possess the potential for awakening. Every single being possesses the potential for awakening. We're a little parochial in Buddhism. We call it Buddha nature, but everybody possesses this. And so because everybody possesses the potential for awakening, every being is worthy of our respect. And this is why in Buddhism, they tend to practice vegetarianism and try not to harm beings. They try to save the lives of beings if it's possible. Not everyone can be vegetarian. Not everybody can try to save the lives of other beings, but the ideal is to try our best to not harm beings in an intentional kind of way. And so, the reason that we don't experience our Buddha nature right now, I'll never forget, someone asked one of the lamas, if we already have Buddha nature, how come we don't experience our Buddha nature right now? If we have the potential for Buddhahood, why are we not experiencing Buddhahood this very moment? And the answer was that we have four veils or obstacles or obscurations covering our Buddha nature. And these four veils or four obstacles and obscurations need to be dispelled through our study and practice of the Dharma. And so one of the benefits of Dharma study and one of the benefits of Dharma practice is that it will gradually remove our obstacles and obscurations that prevent us from seeing and experiencing our Buddha nature. If we look at the four veils, they sort of build from one to another. According to the teachings of the previous Kala Rinpoche, there is basic ignorance. Basic ignorance is the first of the veils, which means we don't experience our mind as having Buddha nature. We just don't, because we're so used to thinking of everything around us as being solid, real, permanent, and unchanging. So we can't experience our Buddha nature. And so the first thing that happens is that when a thought arises in our mind, or an appearance or a perception happens, we instantaneously think of that appearance in our mind as being other than the mind that's having it. And we objectify it. And in objectifying it, we split the world in two. We create dualism. Because we're not able to recognize and rest in our Buddha nature, we instantly dualize the entire world. And that is called basic ignorance. But then, based upon that, we have the second of the veils, which is a habitual tendency. We have the habitual tendency to believe in and theorize that there is a self, a me, or an I that is experiencing these things. And then we solidify that idea of self. So that's the second veil that covers our mind. Once we have the idea of self, we automatically have the idea of other, and that's where the third veil comes in. The third veil is mental affliction. We like some things, we dislike others, and we're bewildered about everything else. So these are called the three mental poisons or mental afflictions. And all of the mental afflictions we suffer from are variations of these three. And so then, based on our basic ignorance, our habitual tendency to posit self and other, and then all of the negative mental afflictions that arise because we're trying to conquer the other, we undertake karmic accumulation. We actually act. We act on our mental afflictions. And acting on our mental afflictions, we accumulate karma. And so then we have karmic accumulation. And that's the fourth veil. And so these four veils, basic ignorance, the habitual tendency, mental afflictions, and karmic accumulation, prevent us from experiencing our Buddha nature. And so the purpose of the entire practice of Dharma is to dispel these four veils so that we can experience our Buddha nature. So I really, really appreciate you giving me this opportunity to correct the record and let you know that the purpose of Dharma practice is to dispel our obstacles and obscurations. I hope this helps.
It totally does. Thank you. That was a beautiful little mini teaching. Thank you.
I appreciate it. No, it's great. Let me take a quick look and see if there is another question in chat. Hang on here. Let's go back. Now, did I miss something before? Okay, Therona, please discriminate between relying on the teacher and refuge. Let's see. Relying on the teacher and refuge. Well, you know, because we haven't recognized our Buddha nature, we do have to rely on the external Buddha, his teaching, and the Sangha. So those are what they're called the three jewels of refuge. But then there are also three roots of refuge in the Vajrayana. So in the Mahayana, they have the Buddha as the teacher, they're called the three jewels of refuge. The Buddha, who's the teacher, the Dharma, that's the path, and the Sangha, that's the community. But in the Vajrayana, they add three additional sources of refuge. The Lama, which is the root of blessing, meaning the Lama gives us teaching, and then we practice those teachings and become awakened. And then the second of these three roots is the Yidam, and I'll spell that, Y-I, which Yidam. Y-I means mind, and D-A-M means bond. And so this actually, in some of the older forms of Buddhist translation in English, like patron saints in Catholicism, they would call them patron Buddhas. Because we bind ourselves to these bodhisattvas and Buddhas. We bind ourselves to them thinking, you are my patron Buddha, I will practice you, and through my practice of you, may I accomplish awakening. And so this is why the Yidam is called the root of all accomplishment, The Lama is the root of all blessing because you get the teachings from the Lama. The Yidam is the root of all accomplishment because through doing mantra practice, you accomplish your Buddha nature. And then finally, the Dharma protectors are called the root of all Dharma activity. Now, the reason they're called the root of all Dharma activity is because right now we are confused about everything and we need extra protection as we attempt to practice the Dharma. And they provide this by being, Pema Chodron called the Dharma protectors. She called them our own ability to say no to negative action. They're bodhisattvas that exemplify our own capacity to say no to negative action. She calls them the big no. So, and so that's why they're called the root of all Dharma activity, because how will we ever be able to enact qualities and benefit beings if we're still very busy trying to subdue our mental affliction? So hopefully that will help a little bit. Did that answer your question, Tharona? Got it? All right, awesome. Okay, let's go back and see. I think there was a question from Justin. Can one take the Bodhisattva vow before the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas if a human teacher is not available? I've been led to understand that a person definitely can do this because it's something that's personal to you. So yes, you can. But of course, my teacher, Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche, told me that it's really, really good to get it from a human teacher. And so he said you should take it as many times as possible from as many teachers as possible to continuously renew your Bodhisattva vow. So if you take it on your own, what you can do is in the morning and the evening, you can renew the vow because every day, because the Bodhisattva vow has to do with your motivation, and because the Bodhisattva vow has to do with your intention to benefit beings, there's always going to be mistakes made because you might have a bad attitude about somebody. We've just gone through a very contentious election cycle. And so lots of people are like, they're telling me their Bodhisattva vow has been sorely tested during this period of intense partisanship. And so I think retaking the Bodhisattva vow morning and evening is probably the least we can do to protect our discipline. Can someone share the address you mentioned last week that we can write and request the small book? I heard it referenced on the recording, but wasn't able to be present, so could not see the chat. Yes, you can use either of the emails, Lama Kathy at Columbus, KTC, I can't spell, .org, or you can use my personal email, camwesley@me.com, which is where emails for book club come from. Sadly, I am way behind on everything that has to do with mail. Yesterday, I packed up all of the gifts that I was to give people for fall retreat, Columbus KTC's fall retreat, and that happened the first weekend in second weekend in October. So I'm super far behind on all that. Let's see. If a student reaches enlightenment, does the teacher and her teachers do too by resonance? Oh, that's a good question. I don't know the answer to that, but oh, wait a minute. Actually, I do know the answer to that one. The Buddha himself said, he said, I can't make anybody enlightened. So the Buddha cannot make you enlightened. Your teacher cannot make you enlightened. You have to achieve enlightenment on your own. And in fact, when the Buddha passed away, his students who actually thought he could give enlightenment asked, oh, please, please. And he said, no, I've given you all the teachings, and the teachings, if you practice them fully and completely, the teachings will give you enlightenment. So, so if a student achieves enlightenment, of course, there's a benefit to everyone who taught that student. Even if their teachers were ordinary beings, when the student achieves enlightenment, there is great benefit for the teacher in that. But unfortunately, it doesn't. Merit helps a person achieve Buddhahood, but it doesn't give them Buddhahood automatically. Would you please define some terms? Sure. What are the terms? You can unmute to ask the question. Okay, Dharma. Yeah, Dharma means, has many meanings. It can mean phenomena. It can mean truth. And so, so Dharma is the truth, but it's also used to describe phenomena. This Dharma and that Dharma, this phenomena and that phenomena. But Dharma is the truth, meaning the truth of the Four Noble Truths: suffering, its cause, its solution, and the path. But I'm not sure that was your question, so let's see if there's anything else. Sentient being. Okay, yeah. A sentient being has mind, is a being that has mind and has self-awareness. And so that actually even includes like insects. And I can't tell you that it involves, that it includes bacteria and stuff, but that's an interesting idea, isn't it? We'd have to ask the high lamas about that one. Do you have any other questions or things you'd like to have defined? Okay, well, thanks for those for that question. And if you have any other terms, you can type them in and I'll get them on the next go round. So we have we've got at least a good basis now to talk about how the Bodhisattva commitment works. And by the way, when we talk about letting go, somebody had asked in the very first session about letting go, how do we learn to let go? And the first way we learn to let go is when we meditate. And when you meditate, you follow the breath going out and follow the breath going in. And so when you follow the breath out and in, what you get is a short period of attention that then is followed by some wandering. Maybe we'll wander into something that happened yesterday. Maybe we'll wander into something that's going to happen tomorrow. And as a result, we are distracted from our breath. And the teaching is that when we notice this distraction, we're supposed to note it. We can even label it thinking, and then we can let it go and then return our attention to the breath for a fresh start in our meditation. So it's like we get a new lease on life, so to speak, for our meditation. And that, believe it or not, for many people is their first experience of consciously letting something go. When they do that simple action of noting a thought, labeling it thinking, letting it go, and then returning their attention to the breath. And that's how letting go begins. And then when we practice love and compassion, when we practice love in any given situation, that's another way of learning how to let go. We're learning how to let go to our own idea about something, our own opinion, our own experience of things. So in any case, I wanted to talk about letting go from that point of view. And as we go through the 37 actions, if you remember from what I said before, sometimes these 37 actions are a little bit tough. It's like tough loves and a little bit exaggerated. So he's going to talk about letting go at the highest level. So let me go ahead and turn on screen sharing, and let's see if I'm lucky. Yes, it worked. Okay. So previously we started with the earliest verses, verses 1 through 5, and talked a little bit about how how the Bodhisattva should practice by learning how to detach from their own aggression and attachment. And now that we've talked about how to distance ourselves from what is harmful, practice 6, we're going to talk about embracing what's genuine. And so we've talked about how to let go of bad friends. Do you remember that from last time? Practice 5, giving up negative friendship. When friendship with someone causes the 3 poisons, attachment, aversion, and ignorance, to increase, and degrades the activities of listening, reflecting, and meditating, and destroys loving kindness and compassion, to give up such a friendship is the practice of a bodhisattva. And we talked a little bit about that last week. And now we're going to go to the other end of this and talk about if we let go of bad friends, how do we take hold of good friends? So they're going to talk about relying on a spiritual friend. When in reliance on someone, your defects wane and your positive qualities grow like the waxing moon. To cherish such a spiritual friend even more than your own body is the practice of a bodhisattva. Well, at this point in our dharma, in our spiritual development, we may not be ready to treasure a teacher more than our own body. But hear me out as to how this might be possible someday. I mean, you know, right now we are always thinking of self-preservation. Let's face it, right? Because we've been doing self-clinging and self-cherishing for how many lifetimes? And so this habit is not going to be easy to let go of. But how are we going to slowly let it go? And part of the way we will slowly let it go is by finding out who really has our best interest at heart. When we associate with friends that make our 3 poisons worse, we have to try to get ourselves some distance, detaching with love, as my friends in 12-step like to say. But who should we then trust? When we meet someone and rely on their instructions, and that's what reliance means here. When we rely on the instructions of a spiritual teacher who says, you know, don't do bad karma, do good karma. And when we do good karma and we begin to feel better because we're not doing bad karma anymore, it's kind of like we say, oh, hey, that worked. And so when in reliance on someone's instructions, your own defects wane, and your positive qualities of love, compassion, and goodness grow like the waxing moon. To cherish such a spiritual friend, even more than your own body, is the practice of a bodhisattva. Well, you know, the perfect bodhisattvas can actually have that kind of reliance and cherishing, even more than their own body. So the someone here, he says, is the positive friend, the spiritual friend. And in this commentary, Khenpo Tsultrim Jamso says, because your relationship with a genuine spiritual friend decreases your afflictions and increases your good qualities, you should consider this friend even more precious than your own body. Then he says examples of how to rely on a spiritual friend are the way that Tilopa relied on Naropa. I think actually it was the other way around. It's Naropa relied on Tilopa. Anyway, and the way that the great Yogi Milarepa relied on Marpa. And Naropa had to surmount 24 hardships, 12 small and 12 great. And then if you read the life of Milarepa, you'll see how Marpa tested him. So I see there's a typo in here. It's not the way Tilopa relied on Naropa, it's the opposite way around. So I know that everybody on this group probably has met or not met, but seen teachings by great masters such as His Holiness the Dalai Lama. We don't have to imagine that the Dalai Lama or the Karmapa are Buddhas. We don't have to imagine it. It's something that really is, it's almost palpable by us to see. And when we rely on their teachings, then we get better and better and better and better. So we can see how we improve in that way. Practice number 7 is seeking refuge. A person was asking what the progression of practice is in Buddhism, and the very first thing we do as a Buddhist practitioner is we begin with the practice of meditation, and then eventually take the 3 jewels as our refuge. We take refuge from the sufferings of samsara in the Buddha as our teacher, Dharma as our path, and the Sangha as our community. But he's going to talk a little bit here about that. He says, themselves captives in this prison of samsara, whom can the worldly gods protect? Therefore, to seek refuge in those who do not deceive, the 3 jewels, is the practice of a bodhisattvas. And so he's talking about worldly gods, such as Brahma and Vishnu and so forth. And it was the teaching of the Buddha, that these gods were actually themselves stuck in the world of samsara, in cyclic existence. The word samsara means cyclic existence of death and rebirth over and over again, without end and without control. And so that's why the verse here says, themselves captives in the prison of samsara, whom can they protect? I remember Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche said that it's like one inmate in a prison saying to another inmate in the same jail cell, get me out of here, because it doesn't make sense to do that. He said the person you really need is the person outside the jail cell who has the key. That's who you need. And because the Buddha accomplished enlightenment, the Buddha has the key to get us out of samsara through the practice of his Dharma. And the Sangha support us in our practice of Dharma. So these 3 jewels, the Buddha as the teacher, the Dharma as the path, and the Sangha as the protectors, as the guides, they are who we seek refuge in. Khenpo Tsultrim talks about this. He said they're called rare and supreme because there's no higher protection to be found. In other words, they are outside of samsara and guide us in trying to leave samsara ourselves. Then Khenpo Tsultrim talks a little bit about the qualities. He said, what are the qualities of the 3 rare and supreme ones? They're mainly 2, the perfection of abandonment and the perfection of realization. The quality of the Dharma is that it's a remedy against affliction, suffering, and confused appearances. If we learn the truth, if we learn the Dharma, then we will have less fear of the things that go on in our life and in the world. Then the Sangha the quality of the Sangha is friendship. They're the community of practitioners who help us practice the Dharma. And then he said, there is the Dharma that are books, and the Dharma that is the actualization of our own freedom. Then he said the refuge is 2 kinds, relative and absolute. Relative refuge arises when we see that samsara has the nature of suffering, and we develop complete trust in that recognition. We come to fear samsara, and by fearing samsara, it doesn't mean that we're staying in a state of fear all the time. It's we recognize that it is a state from which we need to escape. And then we seek refuge from its sufferings, and who is able to protect us? The rare and supreme ones. Why? He said this is a relative refuge. Why? It's a refuge based on conceptual thinking involving thoughts. Ultimate refuge, by contrast, is the realization of the empty nature of all things and the selflessness of persons and phenomena. He said if we practice our Dharma and realize the emptiness or limitlessness of all things, we actualize the ultimate refuge. And when ultimate refuge arises, all of our inflictions and suffering are self-liberated. And what this means is that right now we grasp onto and think of all things as really appearing and really being what they appear to be. Happiness is really happiness, suffering is really suffering, and so on. But through the practice of meditation, we begin to see how our mind creates a lot of our experience, and how we can begin to adjust our experience of the world by adjusting our minds. And so it gives us a little view of sort of a crack in the wall. Practice number 8 is after we take refuge, we learn how to relinquish negative actions. The suffering of the lower realms, so difficult to bear, is the fruition of wrong deeds, so the Buddha taught. Therefore, even at the cost of your life, never to commit negative actions is the conduct of a bodhisattva. Well, again, we may not have this perfect conduct of a bodhisattva who would rather die than commit negative actions. We're not there yet. We don't have that. We don't have that kind of resolve yet. But if the Buddhas and enlightened ones can have that kind of resolve, surely we can have a little bit of resolve to let go of maybe one or two of our negative actions. So Khenpo Tsotrem describes the lower realms, and this is because it's said by the Buddha that there are 6 different states of existence, and we can see these in our world. These 6 different states of existence. There are 3 lower and 3 upper realms of existence. And the first of these is called hell. Now, some people say that hell is a place beneath the ground where there's a lot of fire. Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche had been asked a number of times about whether hell was a real place or not. And last year, he said, he says, I'm coming to understand now, he said, that one of the best ways of explaining hell is that hell is unremitting suffering. And he says unremitting suffering and torment. And so he said, I'm beginning to think that it doesn't really matter where that torment takes place. So it doesn't matter if there's a pit of fire in the ground. If you believe in the experience of hell, that's all that matters. And all of us who have been a human being and been through periods of intense torment, we know what hell is like, and we know we want to avoid it. And the Buddha taught that letting go of anger and hatred is the way to let go of the causes of hell. Second of the lower realms is the realm of the hungry spirits or the hungry ghosts. And whether it's on the ground, under the ground, whether the hungry ghosts are really beings who have tiny little mouths and they never can eat and they never can drink, as they are described in Buddhist teachings, or whether they are just people, human beings that we have seen who always have, who never have enough. They're never satisfied. That even if they have all kinds of qualities and even if they have all kinds of things that they own, they never feel they have enough and they always crave more and more. They're always hungry continuously and they suffer because of their hunger. Then we know, we have experienced and we have known the hungry ghost realm. We didn't have to go somewhere, it's right here. Third, the animal realm, the animals that are chained in the cycle of predation, the smaller animals preying on the smaller animals, the bigger animals preying on the smaller animals. This cycle of predation and involuntary servitude and suffering. This, we've all had moments when we felt chained, and so all of us have suffered this. And so this is what he is saying, that these lower states, these experiences of suffering, whether we believe that they're a place or that they're an experience, we have come to understand through the teachings of the Buddha that these are the fruition of our own negative deeds. And he says, suffering is the inevitable consequence of negative action. We've created within ourselves, by causing others suffering, we create within ourselves the experience of that in the future. We have given that kind of suffering to others. And when we give that kind of suffering to others, we build within ourselves the experience of it in the future. And then he said, at a deeper level, the suffering of the lower realms is just confused appearance that arises from habitual tendencies. It is the same as the suffering in a dream. This is why the Mahayana and Vajrayana assert that suffering does not truly exist. Well, Khenpo Tsotrem is talking to us about the highest view. Right now, we experience suffering, we know that we know a lot about suffering. Maybe we are not in a place to even entertain the idea that suffering is a mental experience, and that we can somehow find a way to purify our mental experience so that we don't experience suffering as we do now. But that's the ultimate point of view. The relative point of view, karma is real, suffering is real, and we must do our best to avoid negative karma and do positive karma. Now, one thing I need to mention is that Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche said that karma itself is still a relative truth, meaning that it's impermanent and can be changed, which is why there are so many practices in Buddhism that are aimed at purifying our four veils, our obstacles, and purifying our obstacles, our obscurations, purifying our karma. Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche said once, he said, there's only one good thing about bad karma. One good thing about bad karma, and that is that bad karma is actually impermanent and can be purified through our Dharma practice. And so undertaking even just the practice of some quiet sitting meditation purifies negative karma in our body, speech, and mind. Not to say nothing of being generous and dedicating our generous actions to the liberation of all beings, making offerings on our shrines, and dedicating it to the liberation of all beings, and so on. All of these positive actions are beneficial. So so these are things that we can purify. So not only then have we through verse number 8 begun to relinquish negative actions, through in verse 9 we talk about striving for liberation. So not only do we stay away from bad actions, we take hold of positive actions. And so in practice 9, he talks about the nature of reality. Like dew on the tip of a blade of grass, happiness in the three worlds evaporates in a single instant. To strive for the supreme state of liberation that never changes is the practice of a bodhisattva. And here, in the three, when he talks about the three worlds, they're generally described as the world of existence on the earth, the world of existence below the earth, and the realm of existence above the earth. And just as we spoke about the three lower realms, there are also three upper realms. The human realm that we currently inhabit, where there's some happiness and some suffering. Then there's the realm of the what they call the jealous gods, who suffer from always thinking that somebody else has what belongs to them and they're fighting others to get it. And then finally, the gods who live a very indolent and wealthy lifestyle. They have everything they could possibly want and need, and they don't care about anything. They're just lost in enjoyment. And what happens to them at the end of their lives is that they suffer the exhaustion of all their positive karma, is exhausted by this lavish lifestyle that they have, and then they fall to lower realms. And they have so much intense suffering at the end. Let's think about the example of a person who has a lot of wealth and power. And then what happens as they see their wealth and power beginning to wane, and they see their power and influence beginning to wane. It's said that these God realm beings suffer intensely in the last days of their life as they see the only place for them to go is down. Their suffering is incredibly intense. Even in the upper realms, there's intense suffering. So we have to try to strive to go beyond these six realms and strive for liberation from these six realms, liberation from all of samsara, which is Buddhahood, which is the absolute transcendence of samsara. And so here he's saying, like dew on a tip of a blade of grass, happiness in the three worlds, on the earth, below, and above the earth, it evaporates in a single instant. We've all been there. You were extremely happy, and then the next instant, bam, something blew your mind, and the suffering ensued. And so what he's trying to say here is that what we need to do is not believe that our happiness is going to last forever, and not believe that our suffering is going to last forever, but to practice Dharma, which will help us transcend suffering altogether. So to strive for the state of liberation that never changes, because here we are in samsara. Everything is impermanent. Everything is changing continuously, and it's freaking us out, right? We get happiness and then poof, it's gone. We get suffering and then we think it's going to last forever. And so there's a lot of continual up and down in samsara. And we would kind of like it for it to be smooth, but it just doesn't happen like that. When we meditate, we begin to see how much of this up and down is in our own mind, in our own experience, in our own habitual ways of looking at the world. But then gradually over time, we can see through samsara completely and become Buddhas ourselves. And so what Kempo Sultram says here, the nature of happiness within all these worlds is temporary. Whether gods or humans, happiness is as evanescent as a dewdrop on a blade of grass. One instant and it's gone. Since this happiness is impermanent and ever-changing, we need to strive for unchanging happiness, which in Buddhism is the changeless state of liberation. A Buddhist practices the Dharma to achieve a result. If there's no result, then why bother to practice? And the Dharma describes three types of results. The first is gaining, first is gaining the three happy realms, or the three realms of relative happiness in samsara. But the second is achieving liberation from the wheel, and the last is attaining Buddhahood. And so he's saying that there are some people who are motivated to practice Dharma by fear of hell, and that's fine, but it only goes so far. And a person who wants to be liberated themselves from samsara, that's good. They call it nirvana, but it's still not full liberation because they still cling to the idea that they're in a state of peace. And then the one who strives for Buddhahood is endowed with the supreme motivation, the desire to attain complete and perfect enlightenment for the benefit of all beings. And so Buddhahood emerges as a result of practicing the Great Way, or the Mahayana, wherein one cuts the root of existence through the supreme intelligence, the superior intelligence, and realizes emptiness or limitlessness. While the Mahayana practice does liberate the practitioner from samsara, the great compassion it engenders motivates the Bodhisattva to remain behind to benefit all beings. And what this means is that once a being has achieved Buddhahood, they actually come back voluntarily again and again and appear to have and appear to be in samsara and appear to be suffering as a way of guiding beings to awakening. And so I think I'm going to stop here for a second and see if there are any questions in chat. Give people a break. Here's a question. Can you talk a little bit about taking vows to help with giving up negative actions? Besides taking formal vows, is it possible to take smaller vows for a particular bad habitual pattern? Is that something that a student can do with a teacher? Somebody asked Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche this question, and his answer was, if you have a negative mental affliction that's really bothering you, he said you can definitely, he said it's not necessarily that you take a vow to not do that negative thing, but what you can do is you can every day when you wake up, he said, whoops, I have to type this in. When you wake up each day, go to your shrine, and in the presence of the Buddha, say, today I will try to tame my, and then and then you'll fill in the blank with your bad habit. And so then at the end of the day, see how you did. You rejoice in your positive actions, and you regret your negative actions. And then make a new commitment to tame your mental affliction or your particular bad habit. And that you would do this morning and evening. And if you do this morning and evening, he says, over time, what will happen is that you will see the negative habit get a little worse. I mean, not a little worse, a little better and a little better, or a little less and a little less. Because when you make this aspiration, you are keeping up with yourself every day to see how you're doing. And it's not just, see, what's cool about Buddhism is that it's not just, I was joking with somebody the other day. I said, there is no such thing as Buddhist guilt, like Catholic guilt, where like, you're bad, you're bad, you're bad. You know, there's also, you're good, you've done well. Rejoice in the good that you've done. So in Buddhism, we're not just trying to tame our negative mental afflictions, we're trying to praise and uplift our positive things. So it's so that we're more even as human beings, and we're not just always looking bad, I'm bad, I'm bad, I'm bad, I'm bad. It's like, oh, I'm good too, and I want to do more good, and I want to do less bad. Does that help? So
that does very much. Thank you, Lama Kathy.
All right, great. And let's see if there's any other questions while we're here. Any other questions? Anybody in audio have a question they want to ask? You can unmute.
Lama Kathy?
Yeah.
Is it possible, like connected with the 12-step experience, that sometimes if you have a problem or a habit, that you could turn it over to the Buddha, like as your higher power?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Because maybe what you're trying to do, you don't seem to be very successful, so you asked for help to be assisted. Yep.
Yeah, you can. In fact, the Buddha is the best person to ask for this kind of help, because the Buddha has actually transcended samsara, and you too can transcend samsara. And so asking the Buddha for help in the moment is a really good thing. A second thing that you can do is in Buddhism, there is the practice of making offerings to the Buddhas. You can put offerings on shrines. Some people make offerings of what are called mandalas, making mandala offerings, an offering of your body, speech, and mind in the ideal universe to the Buddhas and so forth. And believe it or not, you can actually offer your mental afflictions here to the Buddha and Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, saying, help me with these. I make an offering of these to you. So there's a couple different ways you can go about it. So thanks for that question. Is there any other person on audio who wants to ask a question? Okay. All right. Well, then we'll go back to the book. I have to admit there are 37 practices, so I'm kind of wanting to move a bit, because we've got three classes to get through all 37, and I'm crossing my fingers we can get them all. Practice number 10 is, now that we've taken refuge in the Buddha as our teacher, the Dharma as our path, and the Sangha as our community, we've begun by thinking, I want to be a Buddha. I'm taking the Bodhisattva commitment. And so then that brings us to practice 10, which is developing bodhicitta. It says, from beginningless time, your mothers have cherished you. If they now suffer, what good is your own happiness? Therefore, in order to liberate limitless sentient beings, giving rise to bodhicitta is the practice of a bodhisattva. Kempo Sultram says here, if we think about how many times we have lived, I mean, we've lived many, many times, countless lifetimes. The Buddhist teaching is that our minds that we have were never created and can never go out of existence, and that we continue. They say we're migrators. We are migrating through various states of existence. And like, how many times have we had a mother and been a mother and had a father and been a father? And so it is common. It's a common thing to say our mothers, all sentient beings. In other words, we've had relationship with just about everybody in just about every way. And so the question of like, would we want happiness for those near and dear to us? And the answer is, of course. We would want happiness for those near and dear to us. So if they're now suffering, what good is our own happiness? Even if a person does not have a positive relationship in this lifetime with their mothers or fathers, at some point in their life, they have had a relationship with someone who loved them unconditionally. And if that person were suffering, we would do what we could to help them. And so it's saying here that we should think about these beings who need us. Therefore, in order to liberate limitless sentient beings, giving rise to bodhicitta is the practice of a bodhisattva. And so, Kempo Sultram says, in certain kinds of meditation, to visualize the mother as the person who has been kindest to us, and then meditate on all beings as having been our mother is very beneficial. The male or female bodhisattvas respond by developing the enlightened attitude and working to liberate all sentient beings. According to the teachings of the Mahayana, one must develop the enlightened attitude, supreme bodhicitta. But before any bodhicitta can arise, we must have previously meditated upon it. And there are chapters in one of our great books, The Jewel Ornament of Liberation, which, by the way, Columbus KTC is studying on Sundays. So if you want to check out the Columbus KTC YouTube page, you can see the previous chapters that we've talked about in Jewel Ornament. And it gives guidance and help. He says, I advise you to read these chapters again and again. Ah, yes, the man who asked for people to read this book 1,000 times. He's saying, read it again and again and practice them. And so one of the ways to generate bodhicitta is through making the aspiration that we attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all beings. And then to think such thoughts as, may all beings be happy and have the causes of happiness, may they be free from suffering and the causes of suffering, and so on. There's a verse, and I'll try to make sure that I give it to people next time, called the 4 Immeasurable Meditations. If you can think about these 4 immeasurables on a regular basis, that is a really wonderful thing. So I'll give you that one. And then there's another verse that folks who were in Great Path of Awakening class, our previous book club, will remember. When I am happy, may my merit flow to others. May its blessing fill the sky. When I am unhappy, may the sufferings of other beings be mine. May the ocean of suffering run dry. If you can think thoughts like this throughout the day, then gradually and slowly the bodhisattva attitude gets born in us. Practice 11 is Tonglen. Whoops. In fact, it went by so quickly, we have to go back to it. Practice 11, all suffering comes from yearning for your own happiness. The perfect Buddhas are born from the intention to benefit others. Therefore, to truly exchange your own happiness for the suffering of others is the practice of a bodhisattva. So he says, whether related to our body, possessions, friends, enemies, all suffering without exception arises because we're only working for our own happiness. What do they say? We're only looking out for number 1, ourselves. The root of desire for personal happiness is ego clinging. But where do the perfect Buddhas come from? Buddhas arise from the intention to benefit others. This intention is rooted in compassion. And if one has such compassion, one can become a perfect Buddha. The intention of the Bodhisattva is to benefit others by truly exchanging their happiness for the suffering of others. And he says this shouldn't just be lip service. He said you should actually be able to accomplish this exchange. And then he talks about the practice of Tonglen, where we rehearse by breathing out goodness to other beings and breathing in and removing their suffering, doing this over and over again as a way of training our attitude. Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche once said that because we're not Buddhas yet, we can't truly give beings happiness on the out-breath, and we can't truly remove their suffering on the in-breath, but we can train our attitude to want to do that, so that when we attain Buddhahood, we'll actually be disposed toward doing it and want to do it. So he said, really, at first, it's just using your imagination to train your motivation and to train your attitude. So that's important to know. And then he talks about, Khenpo Tsultrim talks about the Bodhicharya Avatar, a guide to the Bodhisattva's way of life. And he says that he makes many aspiration prayers on exchanging himself for others. And in fact, what I tell people is, if you ever really want to be inspired by a poem, read chapter 3 out loud, because it's the taking of the Bodhisattva vow in a very elaborate form. And if you read it out loud, it's very, very inspiring. And I'll see if I can't post on our group a prayer from of Shantideva on this, and then you can read it and see what you think. He says, may I become a servant for those who need a servant. He says, in the aspiration prayer, you aspire to help others who need help. You give yourself up for the benefit of others. And he said, even if you don't read the entire text, at least study the 3rd chapter again and again to develop the proper attitude. In general, he says the Mahayana can be divided into 2 categories: meditation on emptiness, which we're not quite ready for yet, which is a remedy against confused appearances because it cuts the root of samsara, ego fixation. And meditation on bodhicitta because it shows how to behave in everyday life within the relative world. Then he's saying that Ngudjil Togme's 37 practice text provides short, clear instructions for both categories of meditation, but the majority of them are about the Bodhisattva love and compassion practice. And so he says, merely understanding the texts isn't enough. You need to be convinced. He said, even conviction is insufficient. You actually have to apply them in their everyday life. Reading them once and saying, oh, how easy. I understand it. I understand everything. And then putting them aside will not bring benefit. You need to read them again, memorize, and strive to put them into practice. And so this concludes the first section of the book, where he talks about the basic path of the Bodhisattva. Now he's going to get into a series of verses where he talks about, if you're a Bodhisattva, how do you respond to this terrible thing happening to you? And how do you respond to that terrible thing happening to you? So when you read these next sets of verses, you might say to yourself, there is no way on this green earth that I will ever be able to do these things. This is like too much. And I remember that Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche said, when you hear these things, he said, don't become discouraged. Remember that he's talking about the perfect bodhisattvas, and we're not there yet. He said, but we can make the aspiration that in the future, may we be able to have this kind of aspiration. So how does an enlightened bodhisattva respond to something being stolen? Well, here it comes. Number 12, responding to theft. Even if someone driven by desire steals all of your wealth or incites someone else to steal it, to dedicate to this person your body, possessions, and all your virtue of the 3 times, that's the practice of a bodhisattva. So it's like, you want to know how to practice with this? This is how you do it. And he said the application of bodhicitta and the act of dedication enable you to benefit the thief. You also benefit yourself, since these practices accumulate merit and lead you closer to Buddhahood. Loving kindness and compassion are therefore very important. If someone steals all your wealth or instigates someone else to do it, why should you dedicate everything to this person? The basis for the apparent contradiction, see, he even recognizes that this is an apparent contradiction, so he needs to explain it to us, is that someone in a previous lifetime, that sometime in a previous lifetime, that thief was actually your parent. And you have actually, at some point in the past, he showed you great kindness. Understanding this process encourages compassion for the thief, which means not developing anger. Compassion enables us to be patient so we can actually dedicate everything to him or her. Without bodhicitta, we merely become angry. And so there are many stories, he says, of people who come to the Dharma as a result of having been harmed by others. Milarepa is a good example. When he was very young, his aunt and uncle stole all of his family's wealth. Because of this painful experience and others that followed, he undertook the practice of Dharma and subsequently developed gratitude toward his relatives, the attitude of gratitude. Like Milarepa, Mahayana practitioners should consider those who harm them as friends helpful to their Dharma practice. It may be easy to comprehend this Bodhisattva practice, but to apply it is another matter. When someone steals everything we own, we become enraged. It is difficult not to. So he's saying it's natural to feel this way, but is it necessary? It's a natural reaction, but is it necessary? Nevertheless, we cannot practice the Dharma when we're angry. We can't develop compassion toward the thief. Until we behave in accordance with this verse, we're not following the practices. We really must find out whether we can do it. I remember Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche teaching a practice where he said, you have to remember that there are a lot of beings in this world who take a dislike to us for no apparent reason. And he said, there's actually a reason for it. Even if he says, have you ever met somebody and you instantly dislike them? Or have you ever met somebody and they instantly disliked you and there's no reason for it? He said, the reason is that we have lived countless lifetimes. And in previous lifetimes, we have actually done harm to other beings. And in this lifetime, they are our karmic creditor. They're coming after us to get the debt repaid. So he said, it's really helpful when you do sending and receiving to make sure you send goodness to all of your karmic creditors, so that by sending goodness to all your karmic creditors, you gradually repay your debts. So anyway, this is just a thought. This is where we'll be stopping now, because after all, where we're going next is really scary territory. So responding to injury will be practice 13, and we'll do that next time around. So let's see if there are questions in chat. Let's see. At the end of the day, oh, it's me. Judy, will you write out the prayer you said before discussing Tonglen? Thank you. I will do my best. I have to remember what it was. So I will send a couple of prayers. I'll post them on the online event page here, and then as I post them on the online event page, you can go to the event and then download the practices that are put there. So I'll do my best to get that for you. Any wisdom for the realization that there is attachment to the practice of Tonglen and expecting an outcome? I think I understand your question, and if I understand the question is that sometimes when we do Tonglen, we might expect something good to happen to us because of it, or we might expect for something positive to happen. Yeah, we have to recognize that we're sort of giving up any hope that we are going to actually get some benefit from it. And you can actually use those kinds of words. You can say, through my practice of Tonglen, may I protect myself against expectation and and anxiety. They talk, Trungpa Rinpoche used to talk about hope and fear, and how hope and fear are the two poles. We just are always going from one to the other. And so anxiety and expectation are always there. So we almost have to state directly, may I be free, may my practice be free from hope and fear, or anxiety and expectation. I've been sick for the last few weeks. Has there been homework, and where can I view your last few weeks' teachings? Yes, you can find the teachings. There was no homework except to do Tonglen practice. So just making Tonglen part of your everyday practice is the only homework we've had. And I've also encouraged people that if they want to read the 37 actions of a Bodhisattva 100 times. Now, what are they? Oh, here it is. They want to read the 37 actions of a Bodhisattva 100 times. They can write to me, and I'll send them a little booklet, and they can start their 100 times. So that's the only homework, is that I've asked people to try to read it out loud once a week if they can, and hopefully that will help. And then the previous week's teachings are on the Lama Kathy Wesley YouTube page. So you would go to my YouTube page, which I may or may not be able to access let's see if how easy I can find it. There we go. I think, nope, that's not it. Okay, YouTube. Let's see if I can find it. Sorry. Yeah, here we go. Lama Kathy's YouTube page. Okay, and then I'll put that in chat. And then here it comes. Let's see if I can make it happen. And you can click on that, and it will take you to my YouTube page. And then there's a whole page that's just that's just all of the training in love. So there'll be as of tomorrow there'll be 3. Yeah, you're welcome. So sadly, we're going to have to stop here because it's the bottom of the hour, and I want to respect I want to respect your time. So I apologize for not being able to get to everybody's question. If you want to ask other questions, you can go ahead and type them in an email and send me an email, and I'll try to answer them next week. Which reminds me, last week someone asked the question, what are the 10 Dharma practices? And bless them, they actually, I looked them up, and then the person also looked them up. And so now I am able to tell you the 10 Dharma practices. Let's see if I can find them. No, believe it or not, I can't find the email from the lady. Aw, that's too bad. My apologies. I thought I had it right here because she just wrote to me about it this afternoon. Darn. Oh, here it is. The 10 Dharma activities. So let me put them in chat, and you can copy them. Copying scriptures, making offerings, giving, learning, reading, memorizing, teaching, reciting, contemplating, and meditating. So those are the 10 Dharma activities. I had a few, the lady who asked me this question was not, I'm going to be able to be here tonight. So hopefully this will help. All right, shoo. Trying to get through 37 practices in 5 weeks, 37 practices in 5 weeks. It's a bit of a thing, but hopefully this class will inspire you to do some reading of the book on your own. And then next week when we get together, we'll start with number 13, lucky number 13. Okay. So we'll stop here for tonight and end with a dedication of merit. We dedicate the merit of this session to all suffering beings, making the aspiration that all beings everywhere are free from suffering, come to happiness, and then to Buddhahood. And coming to Buddhahood, may they emanate in all directions and benefit sentient beings endlessly. We dedicate the goodness with this thought in mind. May all beings attain omniscience of Buddhahood. Through this merit, may all beings obtain the omniscience of Buddhahood. May it defeat our common enemy, wrongdoing, from the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death. From the ocean of samsara, may we free all beings. May we free all beings. May we free all beings. Okay. Let's see. I don't know if I can unmute everybody, but thank you for
Thank you,
being.
Lama Kathy. Thank you.
Thank you, Lama Kathy. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Take care.
Thank you, Mama Kathy.
Good.
Serve your mind. Take good care. Yeah.
You take care too.
Hang in there.
Yes,
Bye-bye
thank you.
now.
Okay. Yeah. Take care, everybody.